I thought I was going to come into this video with a really solid conclusion about how I felt about Iolo Morgannwg, but as it turns out, I'm really split on this one. So this video is about a man called Edward Williams, and Edward Williams was born in Morgannwg in South Wales. The English name for it is Glamorgan, and his name, Iolo Morgannwg, is his Bardic name. And a lot of bards, a lot of Welsh poets of renown take a Bardic name. And in the modern Eisteddfod, if you submit a poem to the Eisteddfod, you submit it under your Bardic name, like Hedd Wyn in the First World War, people like that. And his name at birth was Edward Williams. Edward Williams was born the son of Edward Williams. He trained as a stonemason, and his Bardic name, Iolo, is the diminutive of Iorwerth, which is the Welsh version of Edward. So he is Edward from Morgannwg. And one of his best mates that he met in London is a man called Owain Myfyr. He's from a place called Llanfihangel Glyn y Myfyr, and so he is Owen from a Myfyr. Owen is an anglicisation of Owain, by the way. Iolo Morgannwg was a poet. He wrote really, really good poetry. He wrote excellent Welsh poetry, he wrote hymns, he wrote all sorts of things, and he was very successful. He made lots of friends in London in the 1770s, 80s and 90s when he moved there, and his friends included people like William Blake and some of his circle of friends, lots of poets, lots of artists, and he joined this circle of really well-renowned artistic people in late 18th century London and started producing lots of work. And he may or may not have been addicted to laudanum at various times, and some of his imagery is quite trippy, but it's still very good. The problem with Iolo Morgannwg isn't that he was a great poet or that he had a mastery of Welsh verse that rivals some of the medieval bards or some of the famous medieval beirdd. The problem is he was also a colossal bull peddler. So when Iolo Morgannwg moved to London in the 1770s, he became the centre of a movement that was going on, and this movement basically was lots of Welsh people clubbing together, forming groups like the Society of Gwyneddigion, and basically celebrating ancient Celtic lore. And that sounds great. The problem arises when we remember that there is no ancient Celtic lore because the ancient Druids didn't write anything down. We don't have a single verse of anything that the ancient Celtic Druids actually got up to. All we've got is commentaries from the Romans, from the Greeks, and from later Christian sources. So, where does Iolo Morgannwg go to get all of this source material? Well, according to Iolo, he digs through lots of medieval manuscripts, lots of ancient texts, lots of the manuscripts of copyists, like Llywelyn Siôn. And if you don't know what a copyist is, basically imagine somebody digitizing books and putting them on Project Gutenberg or the Internet Archive or Wikipedia. The analog equivalent to that is somebody literally going word by word through a manuscript, copying it all down, maybe translating it into Welsh like Llywelyn Siôn did with things like the Gesta Romanorum, and then publishing them as books so that lots more people can enjoy them now that we've got the printing press. That's what a copyist was doing. Iolo said that he was doing lots of that. He was finding these manuscripts, he was copying them, he was translating them, he was annotating them, and he was finding lots of lost poems that had never been found anywhere else by anybody. Cymro disc echoes in my mind. And he was lying. He was making it all up. So the place that Iolo Morgannwg went to get source material for these new Druid rituals that they were making up in the 1790s was his own imagination. And that can be a bad thing. So, if you've been watching any of my videos for ever, you'll know that my sort of baseline opinion is making up history if you pretend it's real is bad, Cymro disc echoes. And if you make up history and you admit that it's made up from the get-go, we'll be fine. We'll be cool. Don't worry about it. Love a bit of Tolkien. All Tolkien did in his fiction was make up history really, really well. And from the get-go, was open that it was all a fictional creation. Like, totally cool, no worries there. Iolo Morgannwg didn't do that. So, when Iolo Morgannwg was living in London, as I mentioned, he was living with the poet set, he was living with the romantic set, he was hanging out with people like William Blake, who became an associate and who actually got involved in some of the activities that Iolo Morgannwg was starting. And one of the things that he started up was a Welsh cultural society called the Society of the Gwyneddigion. And this, you have to remember, is at a time where secret societies are becoming really, really popular. The fashionable people in London are setting up their own versions of the stonemasons, and secret societies and gentlemen's clubs are sprouting up all over the place. Further afield, this is also a time where we are in full Enlightenment mode. So people are rejecting the established churches, they're rejecting religion, they're rejecting national status quos, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, all of that is happening. The Belgian independence movement is happening. Lots and lots of people in lots and lots of places are looking for new ways to live. And it's not surprising, therefore, that the Welsh contingent also wanted to do this. People like Iolo Morgannwg, his friend Owain Myfyr was in London at the same time, and his personal legend is that he was this peasant boy who spent his life savings on publishing his first book, The Myvyrian Archaeology. And that's cobblers. He was a furrier. He was well paid. He'd gone through a furrier's apprentice in London. He lived in central London. He had his own office. And Iolo Morgannwg's personal legend is that he never had any formal education. And I have my doubts there, because that is similar to a 16th century copyist, Llewellyn Siorn, who had no formal education and learnt only Welsh. He was totally illiterate in English. And I think that Iolo Morgannwg had a bit of a jealousy thing going on where he wanted to be the new Llewellyn Siorn. So, the Myvyrian Archaeology that Owain Myfyr and Iolo Morgannwg publish is meant to be full of manuscripts, lost manuscripts, all about the bards. And a lot of the stuff that these manuscripts about bards contain is information on the Druids and their mystical religion. One of the claims is that some of these manuscripts are lost works by who else but Llewellyn Siorn. Now, Llewellyn Siorn was very prolific as a copyist and a man who wrote manuscripts and poems and hymns, a lot like Iolo, and unfortunately, an awful lot of the stuff in the Myvyrian archaeology is just made up. A lot of it is just Iolo Morgannwg making stuff up, passing it off as real. Now, if he had made it up, and the introduction to the book made it clear that this was a work of fiction inspired by the works of people like Llewellyn Siorn and the ancient bards, the Gynfeirdd and the Gogynfeirdd, totally cool, fair enough. We would be friends forever. But he didn't. He said it was real. And the problem there is, if nobody checks it, it's taken as read. And unfortunately, nobody really checked if stuff in this book was real for quite a while. They release another compilation of manuscripts, and again, Iolo contributes a lot of the work to it, says that he's found all of these manuscripts about Druids and about bards, and about the way that the mythical, ancient Celtic religion worked around the bards and around the Druid orders, and it gets published as Barddas, becomes very influential, becomes very popular, and especially in the literary set, becomes quite an inspiration. Unfortunately, the majority of the stuff in this is just stuff that Iolo made up as well. His son, Taliesin, named after one of the ancient bards of Wales, then publishes a load more of his papers and a load more of his works and a load more of his manuscripts after his death. And it takes 40 or 50 years before people properly sit down read through all of this stuff and go, hang on a minute, none of these manuscripts exist. None of these are real. This is all just fake. In fact, one later writer whose name escapes me, but Editing Jimmy will put his name up there, said that Iolo Morgannwg was, quote, hateful. He called him hateful. He said it would be an age before the stain of his hands was cleaned from our culture. And I think that's a bit harsh, but Iolo Morgannwg sure did make up a lot of stuff. And one of the big things that he made up that is still done to this very day is the autumn equinox ritual on Primrose Hill. So if you go to Primrose Hill on the morning of the autumn equinox, you may see a procession of people wearing white robes and hoods, carrying a sword, a big long horn, and a load of banners. And this is the Druids. The Druids go up there and they do their ritual. And the original ritual and the subsequent ones are all based off Iolo Morgannwg making up a ritual. That's fine. If you want to do any of that, go ahead, no judgment from me. If you then claim that the ritual is an ancient one when it's clearly been made up by a bloke from Morgannwg in the 1790s, that's when we get issues between us, because Iolo Morgannwg claimed that this whole thing was based off these ancient writings that he had found, and that all of the bits of it, like they have to go up to the highest hill in London so that they can have a good view of the landscape and really appreciate everything. They have to do it at sunrise because sun worship, and they have to have poetry readings because all of the bards were also Druids and they got the same awen, their inspiration, in the same way that the Druids got their inspiration for their religion. All of that was made up in the 1790s by Iolo Morgannwg and his buddies. When you dig into it, it's very churchy. It's very, very Christian. And it's not surprising. Again, these guys are poets in the Enlightenment, off their on laudanum, and they want to reject the way things are being done. Where do they look? Well, the French look to their history. The Germans have started digging through their history, obviously with tragic consequences in a century or so. The Welsh dig through their history. And what do we have? Well, we've got bards, and before the bards, we've got the Druids, so let's work with what we've got there. Iolo effectively comes up with a church service where you process, you unsheathe and sheathe a sword, you do call and response, you recite poetry, you recite verse and prose, there might be a sermon all about peace and love and justice, and you drink a little bit of booze. There might be a bit of singing, and then you all go home. Nothing wrong with that at all. And again, if you practice modern Druidry, no judgment from me at all whatsoever. But don't claim that it's ancient. Don't claim this is the way it was done, or we will have issues. But that's all fine and dandy and lovely and good and gorgeous and fab. You will also have noticed in the thumbnail that there are runes involved in this video, and Iolo Morgannwg made up a set of runes to go with his new bardic and druidic traditions that he made up. And this is known as Coil Bren y Beirdd, the lots of the bards. And Coil Bren, lots are, you know, like you're drawing lots, you're drawing sticks, and whoever's got the shortest stick loses or wins. That's what a Coil Bren is. It's a lot, drawing lots. And the idea behind Coil Bren y Beirdd is that you write all of these runes on sticks, on poles, and these poles have different sides on them, and you can rotate them in an abacus frame. Complete, total laudanum fueled madness. Like, this is just pulled completely out of the weird purple haze of Iolo Morgannwg's fever dreams. Like, this is completely made up. Some of the runes are obviously inspired by the Futharks. Some of them are just Latin letters that have been drawn slightly wiggly, and it's not real. It's not ancient at all. It is an 18th century confection, a fabrication. It looks good, and the mark, the symbol of truth, the mystic node, is also made up by Iolo Morgannwg. That is still occasionally seen in the Eisteddfod die. It was used on the marketing materials and the promotional stuff for Eisteddfod die for well over a century. and he made it up. It's all made up by Iolo Morgannwg, but it sounds really good. And if you go to places associated with him, like the school named after him, or one of the towns that he lived in, a Bontvain, Cowbridge, just outside Cardiff, you will see a plaque honouring Iolo Morgannwg, because he was a great poet. He did an awful lot to promote Welsh language, culture and poetry, and without him we wouldn't have Eisteddfodau in Australia, all over the world, Canada, the US, Patagonia. We have Eisteddfodau everywhere, and the Welsh National Eisteddfod is a huge, explosive, colourful celebration of our culture that is wonderful. It is probably one of the greatest cultural events in the world for a culture that has a 1500-year unbroken tradition of poetry and singing and music. It just doesn't have the Druid stuff that he made up. That's all new. So, as you can probably tell from the faces I'm pulling, I'm really torn, you guys. I don't know if I think he's a villain or a hero anymore, because I love what he did for our culture. I love how big Welsh culture became, partly because of Iolo Morgannwg's laudanum-induced fever dreams where he made up a load of pseudo-history. Like the runes, he made those up. The Druidic rituals, he made those up. The inspiration behind so much of modern Druidry was made up by this dude. But he's done so much for my culture. Like, he's done so much for Welsh and for the Welsh language. Like, without him, we probably wouldn't have as many people aware of the Mabinogion and the Brythonic roots of King Arthur and stuff like that. Like, we just wouldn't have as much of it. So I don't know how I feel about Iolo Morgannwg at the end of this video. Honestly, I think he's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think he has this amazing, wonderful poetic talent and this huge influence on Wales and Welsh culture that needs to be remembered and needs to be celebrated. But equally, man, he made up a load of history, and it irritates me when I see books written that quote books that he made up, like it quote fake manuscripts about the secrets of the bards and the ancient druids. That's really annoying, because people believe that stuff, and people believing lies about history can lead to very dark, very dangerous places that I'm sure I don't need to elaborate upon. But what do you think? I'm intrigued. I'm so on the fence about Iolo Morgannwg, but he is this weird, he's almost like a trickster god figure in Welsh recent folklore. So let me know what you think in the comments about Iolo Morgannwg. He died in 1826, by the way, and was buried back home in Morgannwg, and I believe his son and his wife are buried in the same churchyard as him in Tre Flemyn. So if you're ever passing Tre Flemyn, Flemyn Stone in English, then maybe pop in and have a little bit of a contemplate on the grave of Iolo Morgannwg, and let me know if he's got any runes of his on the gravestone. I'd be very intrigued to know. So, thank you once again, as ever, for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. Gobeithio fod chi wedi mwynhau y fideo hon. Ac os ti isio, if you want to support the channel financially, then of course we have the Patreon going, we have the Coffee page going. Thank you so much to all of my Patreons. You are literally keeping the lights on and keeping a roof over my head right now. So, diolch yn fawr iawn, unwaith eto am ymuno. Thank you so much for joining me. Tan y tro nesa, till the next time. Y gwir yn erbyn y byd. The truth against the world. Hwyl fawr. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story, but if we're talking about history and historical fiction, do put a disclaimer in there that you are making stuff up, or I will come round your house and fart on your pillowcase, okay?